The sun dipped low over Los Angeles, casting a golden haze across the city's skyline as Jackson Pierce stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his Beverly Hills penthouse. 50 stories below, the world pulsed with life. Honking cars, paparazzi flashes, rooftop cocktails, laughter drifting up from a pool party 2 buildings over. Jackson watched it all with the cool detachment of a man who had everything and nothing. Inside, the penthouse gleamed with the kind of precision that required staff to maintain. White marble floors, black leather furnishings, abstract art chosen by a designer he barely remembered meeting. A grand piano stood in one corner, untouched. A baccarat decanter of bourbon sat on a side table, half full, though Jackson hadn't poured a drink in weeks. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored Tom Ford shirt, glanced at his watch, and sighed. Another night, another gala, another evening of shaking hands and charming investors who believed Jackson Pierce was the man who had it all. He slipped on his jacket just as his assistant Sienna appeared in the doorway. Sleek ponytail, tablet in hand, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Cars downstairs. You're expected at the Wilshire by 8, and..." She hesitated. "Just a reminder, you're on the cover of Forbes next month. The interview's confirmed." "Perfect," Jackson said smoothly, though something in his chest tightened at the thought. Another feature. Another carefully crafted profile of the empire he'd built. Another glossy lie. As Sienna disappeared, Jackson caught his reflection in the window. Tall, broad-shouldered, square jaw shadowed with a day's stubble, eyes the rare piercing green women never seemed to forget. He saw the man the world saw, brilliant, driven, untouchable. What no one saw, what Jackson barely admitted to himself, was the ache behind the empire. 3 years ago, a drunk driver had slammed into his car on a winding Malibu road. Jackson had walked away with a fractured rib, a shattered wrist, and a quiet, devastating diagnosis he'd buried under contracts and board meetings. "You're unlikely to father children naturally," the doctor had said gently, as if Jackson were the sort of man who'd ever wanted a family. At the time, maybe he wasn't. His rise from a modest Boston upbringing to billionaire hotel magnate had left little room for softness. He'd been too busy conquering, proving, winning. But sometimes, late at night when the city settled and the loneliness set in, he wondered if his hunger for success had cost him something far more precious. He poured himself a bourbon, watching the city fade into night. His phone buzzed. A message from Max, his CFO and oldest friend. "Heading to Cabo. Come join us, brother. You need a break." Jackson smirked. Max meant well, but what did a break mean when your whole life was a performance you couldn't step away from? He closed his eyes briefly, letting the silence wrap around him. The truth was, Jackson Pierce was tired. Tired of the noise, the negotiations, the endless stream of people who wanted something from him. Tired of the mask he wore so well, the one that said, "I don't need anyone." And yet, he stayed in motion, because stopping meant feeling. The intercom crackled to life, jarring him from his thoughts. "Mr. Pierce?" The doorman's voice. "Your car's ready." Jackson straightened, rolling his shoulders back. Another night, another flawless performance. He left the penthouse, the door locking behind him with a soft click, sealing in the life no one ever saw. The elevator whisked him down to the lobby where the polished black Mercedes waited. As the car pulled away, Jackson watched the city blur past. Neon signs, laughing couples on sidewalks, families gathered around patio tables. He wondered, fleetingly, what it would be like to trade his world for theirs. But that was a thought for other men, not for Jackson Pierce. He arrived at the Wilshire Grand as flashes erupted from a small crowd of photographers. Cameras turned as he stepped onto the red carpet, his smile effortless, his charm calibrated to perfection. Inside, under crystal chandeliers, the room buzzed with money. Financiers, celebrities, politicians, all orbiting around him. And yet, as Jackson worked the room, shaking hands and offering practiced compliments, the familiar emptiness curled in his gut. He laughed when expected, flirted when required, but inside, a small voice whispered the question he never spoke aloud. What would it be like? To stop running? To let someone in? As the evening wore on, Jackson excused himself to the terrace, needing air. The city spread out before him, glittering and restless. He stood alone, drink in hand, a man admired by millions, but known by none. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow, the life he'd built so carefully was about to shatter, and standing at the center of the storm would be a woman he hadn't seen in 4 years, and 2 little girls with his green eyes. Jackson Pierce stepped out of the town car, barely glancing at the flashing cameras as he moved through the lobby of his corporate headquarters. It was nearly midnight, and the building's marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers. The world knew him as the Night Owl CEO, the man who could close a billion-dollar deal at dinner and rewrite a contract by dawn. What they didn't know was that most nights, Jackson came here not to work, but to avoid going home. He strode toward the elevator, nodding faintly to the night security team. As the doors slid open, a voice stopped him. "Mr. Pierce?" He turned, expecting a board member or perhaps a persistent journalist. Instead, the sight nearly knocked the air from his lungs. Olivia Morales stood at the edge of the lobby, her dark hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, a faint smudge of exhaustion beneath her warm brown eyes. Her posture was steady, but her hands tightened around the small shoulders on either side of her. 2 little girls, mirror images, with dark curls and unmistakable green eyes, clung to her legs. For a moment, Jackson couldn't move. 4 years. It had been 4 years since Olivia had walked out of his life, or rather, since he'd pushed her out with sharp words, long silences, and a wall of ambition she could never climb over. She'd been his anchor in those early years of the company, the only person who ever saw past the steel and charm. But when he got the diagnosis, he'd crumbled, not outwardly, of course. Outwardly, he worked harder, partied louder, and buried the part of him that had once longed for more. He had buried Olivia with it. Now she was standing in his marble lobby with 2 little girls who looked like him. "Jackson," Olivia said softly. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a storm. "We need to talk." His throat worked, but no words came. One of the girls, the bolder one he'd soon learn was Bella, tugged at Olivia's sleeve and whispered something. The other, Sophia, clung to a stuffed rabbit and gazed up at him with wide, shy eyes. He heard the familiar ding of the elevator as the doors slid shut behind him, the moment stretching taut between them. "Olivia." His voice was low, rougher than he intended. "What?" "They're yours," Olivia interrupted quietly, as if she couldn't bear to let him finish the question. "Jackson, these are your daughters." A sharp, almost physical jolt went through him. "No," he breathed, shaking his head before he could stop himself. "That's—" He almost said impossible, but the word caught in his throat. Those eyes, his mother's eyes, reflected twice over. Sienna, his assistant, appeared from down the hall, tablet in hand, and froze when she saw the scene unfolding. Jackson lifted a hand sharply, and Sienna, ever professional, retreated without a word. "Come upstairs," Jackson managed, his voice tight. "We can't— not here." Olivia nodded, scooping Sophia into her arms while Bella toddled at her side. Jackson pressed the elevator button with a hand that trembled slightly, an unfamiliar crack in his legendary control. Inside the penthouse office, the tension was suffocating. Jackson poured a glass of water for Olivia, gestured stiffly toward the couch, and sat across from her as if facing down a hostile takeover. "I had a DNA test done," Olivia said, slipping an envelope from her bag and placing it on the coffee table between them. "I know what the doctors told you. I know you think this can't be. But it is." Jackson stared at the envelope as though it might detonate. The girls were exploring now, small fingers brushing the edge of his sleek leather couch, eyes wide at the shimmering city lights beyond the glass walls. Bella made a delighted sound at the sight of the lights. Sophia pressed close to her mother. Olivia watched him, her gaze softening despite herself. "I didn't come here for money, Jackson. I came because they deserve to know you, and you deserve to know them." For the first time in years, Jackson felt something slip beneath his feet. He'd conquered cities. He'd built an empire from nothing. But in the presence of these two small, perfect strangers, and the woman he'd never truly stopped loving, Jackson Pierce realized just how hollow his victories were. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "Why now?" Olivia exhaled, brushing a hand through Sophia's curls. "Because for 3 years, I convinced myself I could do it alone. And then Sophia got sick. A bad fever. A hospital stay. And I realized they deserve more. Not just a mother. Not just a check. A father." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, pressing his hands to his mouth. His mind reeled with 100 arguments. "This can't be real. I can't do this. I don't know how." Instead, he looked at Bella as she climbed awkwardly onto the couch beside him, tiny shoes dangling above the floor. She grinned up at him, fearless, radiant, and his heart clenched with a fierce, unfamiliar ache. He turned back to Olivia, voice breaking for the first time in years. "I don't know how to do this, Liv." Her eyes softened, a faint tremble in her own voice. "I'm not asking you to know how. I'm asking you to try." For a long moment, Jackson just sat there, the sound of the girls' laughter filling the room like sunlight cracking through stone. And in that moment, something inside him, something old, something tired, began at last to stir. Jackson sat in the dim light of his penthouse office, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The city glittered outside the window, but for the first time in years, he wasn't looking at it. Across the room, Olivia murmured softly to the girls, helping them out of their coats. Bella wriggled free with a delighted laugh, while Sophia leaned sleepily against her mother's shoulder, thumb tucked in her mouth. Jackson's gaze flicked up, locking on Olivia. God, she was beautiful. Not in the glossy, airbrushed way of the women who filled his world now, but in a way that dug under his skin. There was a grace in the curve of her neck, a quiet resilience in her dark eyes. She looked tired, strong, unapologetically real. And Jackson felt suddenly, crushingly unprepared for all of it. He cleared his throat. "So, where do we go from here?" Olivia looked up, arms wrapped protectively around Sophia. "That's up to you," she said simply. "But Jackson, I need you to understand something." She shifted Sophia onto the couch, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "I didn't come here to demand a check. I didn't come here to blow up your life." Jackson let out a sharp laugh, no humor in it. "Too late for that." Olivia's expression softened. "I came because they're at the age where they're starting to ask questions about their dad, and I can't lie to them. Not when you're alive and capable of being in their lives." A quiet stretched between them, filled only by Bella's soft hum as she traced patterns on the glass wall, staring out at the lights below. Jackson raked a hand through his hair. "Liv, I don't know how to be a father." His voice cracked on the last word, surprising them both. Olivia took a deep breath. "I know." She gave him a small, sad smile. "I didn't expect you to. But Jackson, I've known you at your best and at your worst, And I know underneath all this—" She gestured vaguely to the penthouse, the city, the empire. "There's a man who doesn't walk away from things that matter." Jackson's stomach tightened. Once, long ago, she'd believed that, until he'd proven her wrong. Before he could answer, the elevator doors slid open. Sienna appeared, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. But her eyes darted between Jackson, Olivia, and the two girls, missing nothing. "Mr. Pierce, I'm sorry to interrupt. The Singapore call is waiting. I can reschedule if—" Jackson raised a hand, cutting her off. "Number, cancel it." Sienna blinked, startled. Jackson Pierce never canceled. Never. "Of course," she murmured, backing away. But just before the doors closed, her eyes met Jackson's, and something in her face softened. A flicker of approval, maybe, or quiet hope. Jackson exhaled slowly and turned back to Olivia. "I need time," he said finally. "Time to figure this out, to figure me out." Olivia gave a small nod, pulling Sophia onto her lap. "I can give you that, but Jackson, they can't wait forever. They're little now, but they're watching, and they'll remember." He swallowed hard, looking at the girls. Bella was now curled up beside Sophia, her head on her sister's shoulder, eyes fluttering closed. And for the first time, Jackson felt the full weight of what was at stake. Not a scandal, not a headline, not a financial hit, but a chance. A chance at something real, something that had eluded him his whole life. He rose slowly, moving to the window. Below, the street sparkled, tiny moving lights. He'd always seen them as proof of his kingdom. Now they looked strangely small. "You look happy," he murmured without turning, voice rough. "Without me." Olivia's voice was soft. "I'm okay without you, Jackson. That's not the same thing." For a long beat, neither of them spoke. Finally he turned, meeting her gaze squarely. "I don't want to be the man who only shows up when it's convenient." He glanced at the twins, his chest tightening. "But I don't know how to be the man they need either." Olivia stood, shifting Sophia into her arms. Bella stirred, yawning. "You start by showing up," she said quietly. "The rest, we figure out as we go." Jackson watched as she gathered the girls, his heart pounding in a way no board meeting, no billion-dollar deal had ever provoked. At the elevator, Olivia paused, glancing back at him. "I'll be at my brother's in Austin for the next few weeks. Call me when you're ready." And then she was gone. The girls nestled against her, the elevator doors sliding closed with a soft hiss. Jackson stood frozen in the empty penthouse, the sound of their departure echoing louder than any silence he'd ever known. For years he'd told himself he didn't need family, didn't need love. That power was enough. Tonight, for the first time, Jackson Pierce understood just how wrong he'd been. The private jet touched down in Austin just after noon, its sleek white body gleaming under the Texas sun. Jackson stepped onto the tarmac, blinking against the heat. The city stretched before him, all red brick charm and wide skies, a world away from the sharp edges and endless ambition of Los Angeles. As his driver loaded his bags into the black SUV, Jackson hesitated for a moment, palms slick against his slacks. This wasn't a boardroom, and there were no contracts to sign, no negotiations to win. This was Olivia's world, and the world of two little girls he still barely knew how to face. When he arrived at the small craftsman home on a quiet street lined with oak trees, his heart was pounding. The front yard was scattered with chalk drawings, and a small pink scooter tipped on its side. A wind chime danced in the breeze, a soft, welcoming sound that only made the knot in his chest tighten. He hadn't called ahead. Part of him knew Olivia might tell him not to come. Part of him needed to show her, and himself, that he wasn't going to run. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door opened and Olivia stood there, barefoot in jeans and a soft blue top, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She froze, surprise flickering across her face, quickly replaced by caution. "Jackson," she said softly, stepping onto the porch and pulling the door nearly closed behind her. "You're here." "Yeah." His voice was low, uncertain. I was in town." Her brow arched slightly. "You flew your jet to Austin in town?" His mouth twitched at the corner. "I missed them." A pause. "I missed you." For a heartbeat, Olivia's guard slipped. Then she crossed her arms, tucking it away again. "They're napping," she murmured, "but you can come in." Inside, the house smelled of coffee and vanilla. Toys were tucked in baskets, framed photos lined the walls, Olivia with the girls at the beach, birthday cakes with lopsided candles, sunlit afternoons in the park. Jackson stood quietly, taking it all in, feeling like an intruder in a life that had gone on without him. The sound of small footsteps pounded down the hall. "Mommy!" Bella's voice rang out, followed by the thump of her sister's smaller feet. The twins barreled into the living room, Bella's curls bouncing, Sophia clutching her ever-present stuffed bunny. And then they saw him. For a moment, the room went still. Bella's eyes widened, and a delighted grin spread across her face. "It's the tall man," she whispered loudly to Sophia, who half hid behind her sister, peeking out shyly. Jackson crouched awkwardly, feeling the unfamiliar pull in his chest. "Hey there." Bella marched right up to him, hands on her tiny hips. "Do you like pancakes?" she demanded. Jackson blinked, startled. Yeah, sure." Bella turned to Olivia triumphantly. "He can stay." Sophia crept closer, pressing her bunny into Jackson's hand with a hesitant smile. His fingers closed gently around the soft toy, his throat tightening unexpectedly. He looked up at Olivia, who was watching the scene with folded arms and an unreadable expression. Over the next hour, the girls pulled him into their world without hesitation, dragging him into a tea party in the backyard, showing off their glitter-covered art projects, giggling when he tried to pour imaginary tea without spilling. But Olivia stayed back, watching, and Jackson felt it, the space between them. When the girls were finally coaxed into quiet time, Jackson found Olivia in the kitchen, washing dishes. He leaned in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching the familiar way she tucked a stray hair behind her ear. "Liv," he started, unsure where to begin. She didn't look up. "You're good with them," she said softly, her voice carrying both warmth and weariness. "I'm trying," he murmured. She turned then, crossing her arms again, a habit he remembered from long ago, the stance she took when she was bracing herself. "Jackson, I need you to understand something," she said, voice low but steady. "They're not a hobby. They're not something you can show up for when it's convenient or when you're lonely." He flinched. "I know." She shook her head gently. "I don't think you do. You've built a world where you can leave whenever things get hard. I can't afford that. They can't afford that." Her eyes shimmered for a moment and she looked away, steadying herself. I need you to be sure about why you're here." For the first time in years, Jackson was speechless. He wanted to tell her that he was sure, that something had cracked open inside him the moment he saw those girls. But the words caught in his throat, and maybe that was the point. Maybe it wasn't words she needed anymore. He crossed the kitchen slowly, stopping just a foot away. His voice was rough. "I don't know what I'm doing, Olivia. I only know I don't want to miss another day with them, or with you." Her breath hitched, the smallest break in her armor. But then Bella's voice rang out from the living room, calling for Mommy, and Olivia slipped past him with a soft, distracted smile, leaving his heart hanging in the space where she'd just stood. Jackson watched her go, realizing that for the first time in his life, winning wasn't about conquering or controlling. It was about learning how to stay. Jackson barely had time to register the warmth in his chest, the new, unfamiliar pull toward Olivia and the girls, before the front door swung open with a sharp creak. "Liv, you left your phone at—" The man in the doorway froze mid-step. Rafe Morales. Jackson recognized him instantly from old photos. Olivia's older brother, taller and broader now, with the same dark hair, sharp eyes, and protective edge that had always wrapped around his sister like armor. He took one look at Jackson standing in the Morales kitchen, sleeves rolled up, handing a sippy cup to Bella, and his jaw tightened. "Well," Rafe said coolly, shutting the door with a thud. "Look who decided to show up." Jackson straightened slightly, the familiar instinct to command a room rising in his chest. But this wasn't a boardroom, and the man standing before him wasn't impressed by billion-dollar deals or charm. "Rafe." Jackson offered a measured nod. "It's been a while." Rafe's eyes flicked briefly to Bella, then to Sophia toddling around the living room with her bunny, then back to Jackson. His jaw worked for a second before he spoke. "Olivia," he said evenly, "can I talk to you for a second?" Outside. Olivia winced faintly but set down the laundry basket she'd been carrying. "Girls, stay with Jackson, okay? I'll be right back." Bella grinned. "We're having a tea party," she announced proudly, and Jackson felt something strange and tender squeeze his chest. Outside on the porch, the voices were low but not low enough. Jackson caught Rafe's sharp, protective tone even without the words. "Waltzing in here like he's father of the year. Don't trust him to stick around. Don't let him mess you up again." Jackson's stomach twisted. He was used to opposition, competitors, investors, the occasional scandal. But nothing prepared him for this, being sized up as a man, not as a CEO, and coming up short. When Olivia came back in, she moved with a careful grace, as though balancing two worlds. "I'm sorry," she said softly, giving him a small smile. "Rafe's protective." Jackson shoved his hands into his pockets. "He's right to be." The admission surprised even him. Olivia's smile softened for just a moment before she turned toward the girls. "Hey, my loves, nap time." The chorus of toddler protests filled the air, and Jackson watched, an ache building in his chest as Olivia crouched down, gathering them in her arms, whispering in soft Spanish into their curls, smoothing back hair, kissing cheeks. It was the kind of scene he'd never imagined himself part of, and now couldn't stop wanting. When the house finally settled into a hush, Olivia reappeared in the kitchen where Jackson sat nursing a cold cup of coffee. She leaned on the counter, arms crossed, studying him. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Jackson looked up at her. This woman he once thought he'd left behind. Only now did he understand. She was the one thing that had ever mattered. "I'm not here to play house, Olivia," he murmured, fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "I know how this looks. To you, to Rafe, hell, to myself." His voice roughened. "I don't have a clue what I'm doing, but I'm not walking away this time." For a moment, Olivia's face softened, a flicker of the girl she once was, the one who'd believed in him when no one else did. Then, just as quickly, the walls came back up. "I want to believe you," she said softly. "But I have two little girls sleeping down that hall who don't need a father who dips in and out of their lives when it suits him." Jackson swallowed hard. "I know." The front door opened again, and Rafe stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on Jackson. He walked over, crossed his arms, and gave Jackson a long, hard look. "You want to prove you're here for real?" Rafe said, his voice low and edged. "Good. There's a school fundraiser tomorrow. Olivia's been running herself ragged trying to cover costs. Why don't you put your money where your mouth is?" Jackson straightened, surprised by the challenge, but also by the flicker of respect beneath Rafe's blunt words. "Done," Jackson said quietly. "Tell me what you need." Rafe raised an eyebrow. "We'll see if you show up." And with that, the tension in the room thickened, settled, and shifted, because now the test had been named, and Jackson knew this wasn't about donations. It was about showing up, staying put, and proving that the man Olivia had loved once could become the father. And maybe, just maybe, the partner she needed now. As the house quieted and the sun slipped low over the Austin skyline, Jackson leaned back in his chair, listening to the soft sounds of Olivia moving through the rooms. And for the first time in a very long time, Jackson Pierce didn't wonder how to win. He wondered how to be worthy. The school gym smelled faintly of popcorn and crayons, a dizzying mix of chaos and cheer. Folding tables lined the walls, stacked with bake sale treats and hand-painted signs, while children darted through the crowd with sticky fingers and wild energy. Jackson stood at the entrance, feeling more out of place than he ever had in his life. He'd walked into rooms with heads of state, negotiated 8-figure deals on 3 hours of sleep, and commanded the respect of a global boardroom. But standing here, in jeans that still felt foreign and a polo shirt Olivia had quietly handed him that morning, Jackson Pierce was completely, utterly lost. A small voice tugged at his hand. "Daddy, look!" Bella beamed up at him, face lit with excitement, tugging him toward the craft table where Sophia was carefully painting a paper flower, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. "Pretty," Jackson murmured, crouching awkwardly beside them. His hands hovered, unsure. Was he supposed to help? Wait? Compliment? "Purple is my favorite," Bella declared proudly, dipping a brush into the glitter paint and splattering a generous amount across both her flower and Jackson's sleeve. He startled, glancing down at the streak of sparkle now decorating his arm, then caught Olivia's quiet laugh from across the room. She stood near the refreshment table, chatting with another parent, eyes flicking toward him with amusement, and something softer. Something Jackson hadn't seen in her eyes for a very long time. But before he could savor it, a voice cut through. "Well, look who's finally playing house." Jackson turned sharply. Rafe. He stood near the gym doors, arms crossed, eyes sharp and cool. Unlike the other parents dressed in weekend ease, Rafe wore a pressed button-down and carried an edge Jackson recognized all too well: the need to protect, to challenge, to test. Jackson rose slowly, brushing glitter from his sleeve. "Didn't expect to see you here," Rafe said, voice low. "Figured this was a one-time show." Jackson held his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." Rafe's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "We'll see." Before Jackson could reply, Olivia appeared at his side, the girls rushing toward her with sticky fingers and giggles. "How's it going?" she asked softly, brushing a curl from Sophia's cheek. Jackson hesitated, then smiled, sheepish. "Messy, but good." Her eyes warmed for a heartbeat, but the moment broke as Rafe cleared his throat. "Liv, I'm heading out. You need anything, call me." "I will," Olivia murmured, squeezing his arm. Jackson watched the exchange, feeling a stab of something unfamiliar in his chest. Jealousy, maybe. Or maybe just regret, sharp and bitter. As Rafe left, Olivia turned back to Jackson. "You're doing better than I expected," she admitted softly, her gaze flicking to where the girls were now dragging each other toward the cookie table. Jackson exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I have no idea what I'm doing." "That's okay," Olivia murmured, a small smile teasing the corner of her mouth. "Neither do they." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the gym wrapping around them like a bubble. And in that pause, Jackson felt it, the old pull between them, the magnetic tug he'd buried under years of ambition and fear. But before he could speak, his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. Unknown caller. Jackson frowned, stepping aside to answer. "Jackson, it's Sienna." came his assistant's crisp voice. "We have a situation. The board's seen the photos from today. You, Olivia, the girls. It's all over social media. Investors are calling. They want you back in LA for damage control." Jackson closed his eyes, the world narrowing around him. Of course. Because even here, in the small, messy world he was only just beginning to understand, his old life waited, sharp-edged, demanding, unforgiving. "Jackson?" Sienna's voice sharpened. "What do you want me to tell them?" He opened his eyes, gaze landing on Olivia. She was laughing softly, crouched beside the girls as they squabbled over a cookie, brushing hair from their faces, kissing the top of Sophia's head. And for the first time, Jackson saw his choice not as a crisis, but as a line in the sand. He lifted the phone slowly. "Tell them," he said quietly. "I'll call when I'm ready." And then he hung up, slid the phone into his pocket, and walked toward the only future that had ever scared him, the one that might finally matter. By the time Jackson stepped off the plane in Los Angeles, the city skyline looked different to him. Not physically, of course. The towers still gleamed silver under the smog-tinted sky. The billboards still pulsed with oversized faces selling perfume, power, perfection. But Jackson felt the difference in his chest, like a faint pressure, as though the world he'd once mastered no longer fit him quite the same way. As he entered his office, Sienna was already waiting, tablet in hand, tapping briskly at the screen. "You're late?" she said without looking up. "I wasn't scheduled," Jackson murmured, loosening his tie. She stopped, finally glancing up. Her cool gaze softened just slightly when she took him in, the faint weariness around his eyes, the way his posture no longer screamed tension. "You've changed," she murmured, "and not just the haircut." He gave a faint huff of amusement, sinking into the chair across from her. "I think I'm starting to care about things that don't fit in the quarterly report." "About time," she muttered, before tossing a folder on the table. Inside, photos, headlines, social media clips. Jackson with Olivia at the school fundraiser. Jackson crouching beside two giggling girls covered in paint and glitter. "Wall Street wants answers," Sienna said briskly. "Half the board's worried you've lost focus. The other half is convinced you're human for the first time and likes you better. Your publicist says you have 3 days to make a statement before this goes nuclear." Jackson leaned back, fingers steepled. "Let them wait." Sienna arched an eyebrow. "You're playing with fire, boss." "Maybe it's time," he murmured, voice rough, "to stop pretending the fire doesn't matter." For the first time in years, Sienna smiled, a real, small, almost protective curve of her lips. "I always liked Olivia," she said softly. "She made you human back then, too." Jackson flinched, surprised by how much the words hit. But before he could reply, the door swung open, and Max Walker sauntered in, all easy grin and rolled-up sleeves. "Well, well," Max drawled, dropping into a chair with the comfort of a man who'd survived too many of Jackson's storms. "I leave you alone for a few months and you go soft on me." Jackson shot him a dry look. "I'm not sure raising 2 toddlers qualifies as soft." "Oh, it's worse," Max smirked. "It's terrifying." Sienna snorted, packing up her tablet. "Gentlemen, I'll leave you to your bonding ritual. But Jackson," she paused at the door, eyes sharp again, "you need to decide who you're leading, the board or your family, and you can't dodge that choice forever." When she was gone, Max stretched out his long legs and let the silence stretch. "So," Max finally said, his tone softer now, "what's the play here, Jax? You're not the guy who stays." Jackson rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion creeping in. "I don't know how to be the guy who stays, Max." His voice cracked slightly. "But I want to be." Max's expression sobered, his usual humor slipping. "Do you love her?" Jackson swallowed hard. I never stopped. Max leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice low and steady. Then here's the deal. You can't half-ass this, Jackson. You can't show up in Austin on weekends, send flowers on birthdays, and think that's fatherhood or love. You step up or you step back. But you don't get to break those girls the way you broke her the first time. Jackson's hands curled into fists against his knees. I won't. Max nodded once, the approval subtle but there. Good, because you've got something now most of us would kill for. His smile flickered. Don't screw it up. That night, back in the echoing stillness of his penthouse, Jackson poured himself a drink, then set it down, untouched. He stood at the window, the lights of the city sprawling below, and for the first time in years, the view felt lonely instead of victorious. He pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered, heart hammering. Then he dialed. Olivia picked up on the second ring, her voice soft, sleepy. Jackson, I miss them, he murmured, his voice rougher than he wanted. I miss you. There was a long, quiet pause on the other end. Come home, Olivia whispered. Not a plea, not a command, just a truth waiting between them. And in that moment, Jackson realized something profound and terrifying. Home wasn't a place. It was them. The private boardroom in downtown Los Angeles was its own kind of battlefield. Jackson sat at the head of the long, polished table, shoulders straight, face unreadable. Around him, the board members murmured, tapping pens against thick portfolios, scrolling through the latest media clips on their phones. At the far end, Charles Kingston, the eldest and sharpest among them, cleared his throat. Jackson, he began smoothly, we understand this. Development in your personal life has created media attention. We also understand that as CEO, your role is as much about public image as it is about profit. Jackson's jaw tensed. He knew where this was going. We would strongly recommend, Charles continued, that you issue a public statement clarifying the situation. Something measured. Something that assures shareholders you remain focused on the company. Another board member chimed in. A discreet financial arrangement with the children's mother would also send a reassuring message to investors. Jackson's heart slammed against his ribs. Discreet financial arrangement. As if Olivia were a scandal to be contained. As if Bella and Sophia were liabilities to be managed. He glanced down the table, men and women who'd stood beside him for years, who'd believed in his vision, his ambition, his unshakable discipline. And for the first time, he realized just how small this room was compared to the life waiting for him outside it. I appreciate your concerns, Jackson said carefully, voice low. But my family isn't a PR problem, and they're not going anywhere. Charles offered a faint paternal smile. Jackson, we're not saying they should, but the public doesn't need to see you playing house. They need to see you leading. Jackson pushed back his chair, rising slowly, fingers resting lightly on the table. I am leading, he said quietly, and I'll make sure our investors know that. But I won't pretend Olivia and the girls aren't part of my life. For a beat, no one spoke. Then calmly, Jackson gathered his notes, nodded once to the room, and walked out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Outside, the air was sharp with late afternoon chill. Jackson slipped into the waiting car, hands clenching briefly against his thighs. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then called Olivia. Hey, she answered softly, the faint sound of the twins laughing in the background. For a moment, Jackson just closed his eyes, breathing in the sound. I need to see you, he murmured. Tonight. By evening, Jackson was standing at the front steps of Olivia's Austin home, heart pounding harder than it had before the most ruthless deals of his career. The door swung open, and there she was, barefoot, hair loose around her face, a softness in her eyes that still undid him every time. The girls came flying at him first, arms flung wide, Bella's high voice shrieking, "Daddy!" while Sophia clutched his leg with a quiet, fierce grip. He crouched, sweeping them into his arms, burying his face in their curls. And when he looked up, Olivia was watching, a flicker of wonder and fear in her expression. They settled onto the porch once the girls were tucked into bed, the night air cool and still. Jackson leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice rough. "The board wants me to issue a statement, to distance myself from you, from the girls." Olivia went still, her hands twisting in her lap. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly, the vulnerability in her voice cutting straight through him. He reached out, fingers brushing lightly over hers, voice shaking with the truth he could no longer outrun. "I'm going to tell them the only thing that matters," he whispered, "that you're my family. And if they can't live with that, I'll walk away." Olivia's breath caught, eyes shining with tears she hadn't expected. "Jackson," she murmured, her voice breaking, "don't promise things you can't keep." "I'm not promising," he said quietly, threading his fingers through hers. "I'm choosing." And for the first time since this whole storm had begun, Olivia let herself lean into him just for a moment, her head resting lightly on his shoulder as the Texas night stretched around them. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, in the hush between fear and faith, they sat together on the edge of something fragile and breathtakingly real, the life they were daring to build, one choice at a time. The morning sun had barely crept over the Austin rooftops when Olivia's phone buzzed relentlessly on the kitchen counter. She was pouring milk into the girls' cereal when she saw Jackson's name light up on the screen. But before she could answer, a second notification flashed underneath. "Breaking. Billionaire CEO Jackson Pierce seen in Texas with secret family." Her breath caught. The article loaded slowly, her fingers trembling as she scrolled. Paparazzi photos, blurry but unmistakable, of Jackson crouched at the school fundraiser with Bella in his arms, of Sophia perched on his shoulders in the park, of the two of them sharing a quiet laugh on her front porch. The headline twisted like a knife. "CEO's Texas Love Nest, Hidden Family Shocks Investors." "Mommy, what's wrong?" Bella's small voice floated across the table. Olivia quickly forced a smile, setting the phone down as she kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Nothing, baby," she whispered. "Finish your breakfast, okay?" But inside, her chest was a storm. By noon, the front driveway was lined with reporters, their voices echoing through the street as neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Olivia stood at the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching the chaos unfold. Jackson's sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. He stepped out, eyes shaded by dark sunglasses, shoulders tense beneath his tailored jacket. The reporters surged forward. "Mr. Pierce, is it true you're leaving your company for a woman and her kids? Mr. Pierce, will there be a wedding announcement? Jackson, are you stepping down as CEO?" Jackson said nothing, only lifting a hand once in quiet dismissal as his security team cleared the path to the house. Inside, Olivia waited, heart pounding. When the door opened and he stepped into the quiet warmth of her living room, the tension cracked between them like a whip. "Liv, don't," she whispered, voice shaking as she turned away. "You said you were going to protect us, not parade us in front of the world." Jackson pulled off his sunglasses, dragging a hand through his hair, frustration etched deep in his features. "I didn't leak this," he murmured. "I kept everything private. Someone at the company—" He exhaled sharply. "The board must have known. They're pushing back hard." Olivia let out a soft, broken laugh. "Of course they are. And now we're the mess they can't hide." She wrapped her arms around herself, shoulders tight. "I have 2 little girls terrified because there are strange men with cameras outside our house, Jackson. I don't care what statements you make or how much money you throw at this. They don't understand why their home isn't safe anymore. Jackson's jaw worked, the hard edge of the CEO still flickering behind his eyes. But when he looked at Olivia, it softened, because here, in this house, he wasn't the boss. He was the man who had failed her once before, and he could feel the thin thread of her trust fraying between them. "I'll fix this," he said quietly. "You can't," Olivia whispered. "Not this time. Not with a press release or a promise." For a long moment, they stood in the silence of the living room, the sound of the girls' soft voices drifting down the hall, the muffled chaos of reporters outside, and the quiet thrum of two people standing on the edge of breaking. Jackson took a hesitant step forward. "Olivia," he murmured, his voice raw, "don't shut me out." Her eyes lifted to his, filled with fear and fierce love, all tangled together. "I'm not shutting you out," she said, voice tight. "I'm asking you to decide what you want. Because if you choose this life, if you choose us, you don't get to go halfway. You have to step into this with both feet, and I can't keep waiting for you to figure that out." The doorbell rang sharply, making them both flinch. Jackson's face darkened, the exhaustion and fury written in every line of his body. "I'll handle it," he murmured, brushing his fingers lightly over Olivia's shoulder. As he turned toward the door, Olivia watched him. This man she had loved and lost, and now stood on the verge of letting back in. And in that moment, she wondered if love was enough to hold together two people still learning how to stay. That night, long after the reporters were gone, Jackson sat alone on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring out into the dark. Inside, Olivia tucked the girls into bed, her quiet voice floating through the window, singing a lullaby that still made his chest ache. Jackson closed his eyes, pressing a hand to his face. He had built a kingdom of steel and glass, a fortress no one could break, and now, the only thing he wanted to protect was this small, imperfect, chaotic home. But love, he was learning, wasn't about walls. It was about standing in the storm, unarmed, and choosing to stay. Jackson stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse bathroom, the city shimmering behind him like a false promise. His tie hung loose around his neck, his shirt rumpled, his eyes shadowed with the kind of exhaustion no amount of money or power could fix. He'd spent the last 48 hours in damage control. Meetings, calls, statements, negotiations. His team had handled the press, the board, the investors. Every fire was smothered. Every headline spun. And none of it mattered. Because when he'd called Olivia that afternoon, her voice was cool, careful, quiet. "Jackson, the girls need calm right now," she'd said softly. "So do I." Not, "come over." Not, "we'll wait for you." Just a space that had once been filled with possibility and was now filled with doubt. He closed his eyes and leaned heavily against the marble counter, the weight of success pressing on his chest like a stone. That night the penthouse was a hollow palace, no laughter echoing down the hall, no small feet pattering across the floor, no soft voice humming in the next room. He poured a glass of bourbon, then set it down untouched, staring out over the city lights. For years this view had been his victory. Now it looked like a prison. Back in Austin, Olivia stood in the girls' bedroom, watching them sleep. Bella curled against her pillow, a faint glitter still clinging to her hair from the school party. Sophia, thumb in her mouth, her bunny tucked under her chin. Olivia's heart twisted. She ached for Jackson, for the man she knew he wanted to become. But she had promised herself, after years of heartbreak, that she would never teach her daughters to wait for someone who only showed up halfway. Rafe's voice echoed in her head from earlier that afternoon. "Liv," he'd said quietly, "I know you love him. But love isn't just words. It's what you choose when it's hard. Don't let him charm his way in. Make sure he stays." Olivia brushed a hand over Bella's soft curls, then turned off the light, retreating to the kitchen with a heart heavy with hope and fear. The next morning, Jackson was back in Austin before the sun rose. He stood on Olivia's porch, hands trembling slightly as he lifted his fist to knock. When the door opened, Olivia stood there in an old sweatshirt, her hair pulled up, eyes wary. "Jackson," she murmured, surprise flickering across her face. "What are you doing here?" He let out a slow breath, voice rough. "I'm done fighting the wrong battles." Olivia's brow creased, confusion and guarded hope mixing in her eyes. He glanced past her, toward the soft hum of the house, the drawings taped to the fridge, the sneakers by the door. "I've spent my whole life proving I could win," Jackson said quietly, "and none of it means a damn thing if I lose this." He took a step closer. "If I lose you, if I lose them." Her breath caught, but she didn't move. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he went on, his voice low and trembling. "I'm asking for the chance to show up, every day. Not as Jackson Pierce, CEO, just as Jackson, the man who loves you, the man who wants to be their father, fully, completely." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Olivia reached up slowly, brushing her fingertips over his jaw, her voice breaking. "You're scared," she whispered. His throat tightened. "I've never been more scared in my life." A soft laugh slipped from her, half sob, half relief. "Good," she murmured. "So am I." And in the quiet hush of a Texas morning on a small front porch surrounded by old oak trees and the faint sound of children stirring inside, Jackson finally realized that this messy, terrifying, beautiful life was the only thing he'd ever truly wanted. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her in, pressing his face to her hair as her arms slid around his waist. Inside, the girls' voices floated down the hall, calling for Mommy, for Daddy. And this time, when Jackson stepped through the door, it wasn't as a visitor. It was as a man who had finally come home. Jackson stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse bathroom, the city shimmering behind him like a false promise. His tie hung loose around his neck, his shirt rumpled, his eyes shadowed with the kind of exhaustion no amount of money or power could fix. He'd spent the last 48 hours in damage control, meetings, calls, statements, negotiations. His team had handled the press, the board, the investors. Every fire was smothered, every headline spun, and none of it mattered. Because when he'd called Olivia that afternoon, her voice was cool, careful, quiet. "Jackson, the girls need calm right now," she'd said softly. "So do I. Not come over. Not we'll wait for you. Just a space that had once been filled with possibility and was now filled with doubt." He closed his eyes and leaned heavily against the marble counter, the weight of success pressing on his chest like a stone. That night, the penthouse was a hollow palace. No laughter echoing down the hall, no small feet pattering across the floor, no soft voice humming in the next room. He poured a glass of bourbon, then set it down untouched, staring out over the city lights. For years, this view had been his victory. Now, it looked like a prison. Back in Austin, Olivia stood in the girls' bedroom, watching them sleep. Bella curled against her pillow, a faint glitter still clinging to her hair from the school party. Sophia, thumb in her mouth, her bunny tucked under her chin. Olivia's heart twisted. She ached for Jackson, for the man she knew he wanted to become. But she had promised herself, after years of heartbreak, that she would never teach her daughters to wait for someone who only showed up halfway. Rafe's voice echoed in her head from earlier that afternoon. "Liv," he'd said quietly, "I know you love him. But love isn't just words. It's what you choose when it's hard. Don't let him charm his way in. Make sure he stays. Olivia brushed a hand over Bella's soft curls, then turned off the light, retreating to the kitchen with a heart heavy with hope and fear. The next morning, Jackson was back in Austin before the sun rose. He stood on Olivia's porch, hands trembling slightly as he lifted his fist to knock. When the door opened, Olivia stood there in an old sweatshirt, her hair pulled up, eyes wary. "Jackson," she murmured, surprise flickering across her face. "What are you doing here?" He let out a slow breath, voice rough. "I'm done fighting the wrong battles." Olivia's brow creased, confusion and guarded hope mixing in her eyes. He glanced past her, toward the soft hum of the house, the drawings taped to the fridge, the sneakers by the door. "I've spent my whole life proving I could win," Jackson said quietly, "and none of it means a damn thing if I lose this." He took a step closer. "If I lose you, if I lose them." Her breath caught, but she didn't move. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he went on, his voice low and trembling. "I'm asking for the chance to show up, every day, not as Jackson Pierce, CEO, just as Jackson, the man who loves you, the man who wants to be their father, fully, completely." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Olivia reached up slowly, brushing her fingertips over his jaw, her voice breaking. "You're scared," she whispered. His throat tightened. "I've never been more scared in my life." A soft laugh slipped from her, half sob, half relief. "Good," she murmured. "So am I." And in the quiet hush of a Texas morning, on a small front porch surrounded by old oak trees and the faint sound of children stirring inside, Jackson finally realized that this messy, terrifying, beautiful life was the only thing he'd ever truly wanted. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her in, pressing his face to her hair as her arms slid around his waist. Inside, the girls' voices floated down the hall, calling for Mommy, for Daddy. And this time, when Jackson stepped through the door, it wasn't as a visitor. It was as a man who had finally come home. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across Olivia's kitchen. Jackson sat at the small wooden table, fingers wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, watching Olivia move gracefully through the room as she packed the girls' lunches. He should have felt calm after last night, after confessing the truth, after hearing the words he'd wanted for years. But the knot in his chest only tightened. Because the hardest part wasn't over. It was just beginning. Bella came barreling into the kitchen, hair a riot of curls, a princess backpack bouncing on her tiny shoulders. She launched herself at Jackson, giggling as he caught her midair. "Daddy, look," she squealed, showing off a glittery sticker on her hand. He grinned, brushing her hair back from her face. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Sophia toddled in next, quieter, clutching her bunny, eyes wide as she climbed onto his lap without a word. For a moment, Jackson closed his eyes, pulling both girls close. He felt the weight of them, the softness of their hair against his cheek, the fierce, protective ache in his chest. He didn't want to leave, but he knew he had to. Later, after the girls were off to school and the house had quieted, Jackson stood by the window, hands shoved into his pockets, watching Olivia move around the living room. She was humming softly under her breath, folding tiny pairs of socks, her brow furrowed in thought. "Liv," he said quietly. She looked up, a question in her eyes. "I need to go back to L.A., he murmured. The words hung in the air like a crack in glass. Olivia's fingers stilled over the laundry, her face unreadable. "I thought you might," she said softly. He crossed the room, crouching in front of her, his hands resting lightly on her knees. "I have to finish this," he said, his voice rough. "I have to face the board, the press, the investors. Not to prove anything to them, but to show you, to show the girls, that I can be a man who owns his choices." Olivia's eyes shimmered, her fingers trembling as she brushed them through his hair. "I'm scared, Jackson," she whispered. "I'm scared you'll go back there and get swallowed up, that you'll forget this, forget us." His chest tightened, a raw ache threading through his ribs. "I won't," he whispered fiercely. "I've already lost you once. I won't make that mistake again." A soft, shaky breath escaped her lips. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his, her hands cradling his face. "Promise me," she whispered. "I promise," he murmured, the words a vow carved from the deepest part of him. Back in Los Angeles, the city swallowed Jackson whole. Reporters crowded the sidewalks outside his office tower. Headlines flared across social media. His inbox overflowed with demands, questions, crisis strategies. He walked through the marble lobby with his jaw tight, his shoulders squared, every step a battle. But inside, everything felt different, because for the first time, he wasn't walking into this world to conquer it. He was walking in to set himself free. That night, after a 12-hour day, Jackson sat alone in his penthouse, staring at a photo on his phone. It was a picture Olivia had sent that afternoon, Bella and Sophia on the swings, hair flying wild in the Texas sun, mouths wide with laughter. He stared at it until his vision blurred, a quiet ache pulsing through his chest. When his phone buzzed, he answered on the first ring. "Hey." Olivia's voice came through, warm and soft and achingly familiar. "Hey," he murmured, closing his eyes. There was a pause, then the faint sound of the girls giggling in the background. "Bella wants to know if you're coming home soon," Olivia whispered. Jackson's throat tightened. "I'm working on it," he said quietly. "Every minute, I'm working on it." And as he sat there in the dark, the city sprawling around him in all its glittering loneliness, Jackson Pierce finally understood the battle he'd been fighting all along, not against the board or the press or his own past, but against the part of himself that believed love was something you had to earn, rather than something you simply had to choose again and again. And this time, he was ready to choose. The conference room was packed. Jackson stood at the head of the long mahogany table, the windows behind him stretching to the Los Angeles skyline. Board members lined the seats, their faces tight with expectation. Reporters murmured in the back, and cameras waited outside the glass doors. Sienna stood quietly at the edge of the room, arms crossed, her sharp eyes watching him like a sentinel. Jackson took a slow breath, fingers resting on the back of his chair, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. He could feel the pulse of the old life, humming just beneath the surface, the voice that had always whispered, "Win at all costs, control everything, don't let them see you bleed." But that voice was quieter now, almost gone. He straightened. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice low but steady, carrying across the room. "I know there's been a lot of speculation about my family, my role here, and where the company is headed." A murmur rippled down the table. Jackson's gaze swept over them, calm and unwavering. "I built this company from the ground up. I sacrificed for it. I lived for it." He paused, his voice softening. "And somewhere along the way, I forgot that success without love is empty." A hush fell. Jackson drew a slow breath. "I'm not stepping down. I'm not disappearing. But I am redefining what matters. My daughters, my family, are part of my life. And they will not be hidden or shamed or pushed aside to make anyone more comfortable." One of the board members shifted, clearing his throat. "Jackson, this—" Jackson lifted a hand, and the man fell silent. "I've always believed leadership means taking responsibility. So let me be clear. If any of you believe that being a father makes me unfit to lead, say it now." But I promise you, the man I am with my family is the man this company has always needed." For a long, waited moment, no one spoke. Then Sienna stepped forward, her voice cool and clear. "He's right." The murmuring broke into quiet nods, reluctant but real. And just like that, the air shifted. Later that night, Jackson walked through the quiet house in Austin, his bags still sitting by the door. The flight had been impulsive, a decision made the second the meeting ended, his heart pulling him home before his head could second-guess it. He found Olivia in the backyard, wrapped in a sweater, her feet tucked under her as she sat on the porch swing. Her eyes lifted when she saw him, surprise flickering across her face before it softened into something deeper. "You're here," she murmured. "I'm here," he said softly, stepping toward her. She rose slowly, crossing the space between them, her arms sliding around his waist as his folded around her shoulders. For a long moment they stood like that, swaying slightly under the Texas stars. When she pulled back, her eyes shimmered. "What happened?" Jackson smiled faintly, brushing a thumb over her cheek. "I told them the truth. And then I came home." Inside, a soft sound floated down the hall. Bella's sleepy giggle, Sophia's quiet voice. Jackson's chest tightened, the last of his walls cracking open. "I don't know how to do this perfectly, Liv," he whispered, "but I want to do it with you. With them. For real." Her lips curved into a trembling smile, her forehead resting against his. "That's all I ever wanted." And as the night settled around them, the laughter of their daughters, the rustle of wind through the oak trees, the quiet, fierce beat of two hearts learning to stay, Jackson Pierce understood he was finally standing in the only place that had ever mattered, not at the top of the world, but at the center of his own. The morning sun poured through the kitchen windows, filling the room with a golden warmth that softened everything it touched. The stack of half-folded laundry on the counter, the crayons scattered across the table, the quiet buzz of the coffee machine. Jackson stood barefoot in the middle of it, sleeves rolled up, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. He stared at the pancake batter in the mixing bowl like it was a hostile takeover deal he hadn't prepared for. "Daddy, you gotta stir it," Bella announced from her perch on the counter, tiny fingers gripping the edge of the bowl, her grin wide and sticky with strawberry jam. Sophia, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her bunny, offered a solemn nod. "Mommy stirs 3 times. Jackson gave a quiet laugh, shaking his head. 3 times, huh? All right, boss." He stirred carefully, the motion clumsy but careful, earning an approving clap from Bella. From the doorway, Olivia leaned against the frame, watching the scene with a soft smile curling at her lips. It wasn't just the pancakes. It was the way Jackson had folded into their lives over the past few weeks, without flash or fanfare, but with a quiet, deliberate steadiness that both melted her heart and terrified her in equal measure. He drove the girls to preschool, stumbling over car seat buckles but learning quickly. He read bedtime stories, sometimes falling asleep halfway through, voice thick with exhaustion but unwilling to miss a page. He answered late-night work calls from the porch instead of the office, phone cradled between shoulder and ear, while he rocked Sophia back to sleep after a nightmare. He was, for the first time, here. And yet, Olivia's heart still fluttered with a quiet, persistent fear. Could this last? Could he last? That night, after the girls had been tucked in, Bella with her princess crown slipping over one eye, Sophia cradled in a sea of stuffed animals, Olivia found Jackson outside, sitting on the porch steps with a blanket draped over his shoulders. The Texas stars were scattered like diamonds across the dark sky, and for a moment, she just stood there, watching him. "You're getting good at this," she murmured, stepping barefoot onto the porch. Jackson looked up, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Still learning." She sat beside him, tucking her knees up under her chin, the side of her arm brushing his. For a long moment they sat in the easy hush of the night, the kind of quiet that only comes when two people have walked through enough storm to understand the gift of stillness. "I keep waiting to wake up," Olivia whispered softly, her voice threading through the dark, "to find out this was just a season, and you'll go back." Jackson exhaled, the sound rough, his fingers reaching for hers. "I get it," he murmured. "You've seen the worst of me. You had every reason to walk away." She turned to face him, eyes shimmering. "I almost did." His throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. "But you're here," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. "And that scares me even more." Jackson pulled her hand into his lap, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "Liv, I used to think love was something you earned by being perfect, by winning, by proving yourself over and over again." He drew in a slow breath, his voice thick. "But you and those girls, you've taught me it's not about perfection. It's about showing up every single day, even when you're terrified you're not enough." Olivia's eyes blurred and she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder as his arm curled around her. They sat there as the wind rustled through the trees, as the house behind them settled into the hush of night, as the quiet promise between them grew stronger, steadier, more real. And in that moment, Olivia understood something she hadn't dared believe before. This wasn't the man who had once walked away. This was the man who had fought to come home. The backyard was strung with soft white lights, their glow flickering gently across the oak trees as dusk settled over Austin. Laughter and music drifted through the warm evening air. Bella and Sophia twirled barefoot in the grass, crowns of daisies slipping sideways in their curls as they chased each other around a cluster of picnic tables. Rafe stood at the grill, a beer in hand, shaking his head as the girls whooped and tumbled in the grass. Jackson leaned against the porch railing, watching it all with a quiet, settled smile. A smile that came easier now, one that reached his eyes without effort. It was the twins' birthday, and the backyard was filled with family, neighbors, and the sweet chaos of cake, balloons, and small, sticky hands. Olivia stepped beside him, brushing her shoulder lightly against his. She wore a soft summer dress, her hair loose, her eyes glowing with a peace he hadn't seen in years. "You okay?" she murmured, her fingers grazing his. Jackson let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sigh. "Yeah," he said softly. "More than okay." She smiled, reaching up to smooth a curl from his forehead. "Daddy!" Bella shrieked, barreling toward him, Sophia a few steps behind. Jackson crouched low, arms wide, and scooped them both into a bear hug, laughing as they giggled against his chest. "Daddy, cake time," Sophia announced, eyes wide with glee. He lifted them both, one on each hip, and carried them toward the table, Olivia following with a quiet, contented smile. As the evening faded and the last of the guests trickled out, Jackson found Olivia on the porch swing, a glass of wine in her hand, her bare feet tucked under her. He joined her, stretching an arm along the back of the swing, pulling her gently against his side. For a moment, they just sat. No need to fill the silence, no need to explain the quiet that had finally settled between them. "I had a ring made," Jackson murmured suddenly, his voice low, almost shy. Olivia's breath caught, but she didn't move. "I was going to wait," he continued, brushing his thumb along her arm. "Wait until the media calmed down, until the board was settled, until I felt like I'd earned this moment." He exhaled softly, resting his cheek against the top of her head. "But I realized, that's the old me talking, the one who thought love was something you had to be worthy of before you could ask for it." Olivia turned, her eyes shimmering in the soft light. Jackson smiled, a little crooked, a little unsure, a lot more human than the man he had been a year ago. "So I'm not waiting," he said simply. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box and placed it in her hand. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, a delicate ring, a simple band with 2 small diamonds set beside a single larger one. "Me," Jackson murmured, his voice thick. "And the girls. All of us, together." Olivia let out a soft laugh, half a sob, as she pressed a hand over her mouth. "Jackson Pierce," she whispered, eyes shining, "I never wanted perfect." She cupped his face in her hands, brushing her thumb over his jaw. "I just wanted you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath warm and uneven as they sat there, wrapped in the hush of the night, the faint laughter of their daughters still drifting through the windows. Later, when the house had gone quiet and the girls were fast asleep, Jackson wandered through the rooms, his footsteps soft against the worn wooden floors. He paused at the girls' bedroom, watching them for a moment. Bella sprawled sideways across the bed, Sophia curled tightly with her bunny. He felt something rise in his chest then, something fierce and tender and almost too big to hold. This was the life he'd spent years running from. And now, it was the only thing he wanted to run toward. Outside on the porch, Olivia waited for him, cradling a mug of tea, her legs tucked under her. Jackson sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, pulling her in close. As the night stretched out before them, quiet and vast and full of promise, Jackson understood. Wealth had given him many things, but it was love, imperfect and hard-won, that had finally made him whole. He wasn't just a billionaire anymore. He was a father, a partner, a man who had learned at last that the greatest victory wasn't conquering the world, but surrendering, with his whole heart, to the people who made life worth living. And under the Texas stars, with Olivia's head on his shoulder and his daughters sleeping safely inside, Jackson Pierce smiled into the dark, knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be.